The New York Times reported this week that shortly after journalist Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated in Turkey, a member of the Saudi kill team instructed a superior over the phone to tell your boss. That boss is believed to be Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who back at home continues to crack down on his critics. One such critic is the prominent Muslim cleric Sheikh Salman al-Auda, who's been held in solitary confinement for opposing the government and is now facing a possible death sentence. Joining me to discuss his situation is his son, Abdullah al-Auda, a Saudi citizen who is now living in the United States and fears returning. He's a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. Abdullah, thanks for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you for hosting me.
The Saudi authorities had your father imprisoned last year and charged with over 35 different crimes, including corrupting the land, connection to a terrorist organization, and offending patriotism. What's your response to the Saudi authorities and to those charges?
Well, it's the same rogue operation is going on actually for dissidents abroad, for those who disagree at home, for journalists, economists, public figures in general. So my response is that the charges actually represent how the state would crack down on any different view and on any person who disagrees.
And Saudi prosecutors in September of this year called for your father's execution too. Do you think they're serious about that they would really execute a cleric as prominent as your father, Salman al-Auda?
Well, do you think those who went to the Saudi consulate were serious to take the life of the prominent journalist and veteran Saudi Jamal Khashoggi? It's the same mentality. It's a pattern. It did not start with my father. Did not start with Jamal Khashoggi. It's a pattern that we have seen through the past 1.5 years since the Crown Prince came to power. They did everything in their power to just silence others, to crack down on dissent, to just do impulsive policy.
You say it's a pattern. Some might say, yes, it is a pattern, and your father was arrested, imprisoned, punished by the Saudi authorities in the past, too, in the 1990s, when he was a quote-unquote Islamist, rabble-rouser, his critics said. Many would say that's why he's being imprisoned. It's nothing to do with MBS. The Saudi government, under any prince or king, has always taken a very dim view of people who oppose the government. Is that fair?
It's true. Tyranny is always tyranny. Trying to ask and demand political reform is never something that you should be punished for. Political reform that my father and others pushed for is actually the solution, is actually the path towards stability.
Okay. We'll come back to the political reform in a moment. Just to confirm, many say your father was arrested in September 2017 because he refused to publish a tweet to his 14 million followers at the request of the Saudi government that supported the Saudi-led blockade of Qatar, which, full disclosure, owns this channel, owns Al Jazeera English. Is that true?
It's the trigger. It's true, because after he tweeted, when he heard about the reconciliation between the Qatar and the Saudi government, he tweeted, "May Allah reconcile between their hearts for the better of their people." A few hours after that tweet, he was arrested. That was the trigger. That's, of course, the direct reason that he was arrested in September 2017. But there is a long history and relationship.
And just to be clear, before we get to that long history, was your father being paid by the Qatari government or anyone else in Qatar? Because that's another accusation sometimes thrown against him by supporters of the Saudi government.
He is never paid. And you know what? If he was at any point paid by the government or was conspiring with any foreign agent, they would have a lot of evidence to prove. They would show it in the state. They have all his accounts.
So far.
They didn't show anything. If you read the Justice Memorandum against him and the charges, it's very just vague. Preposterous. Yeah.
When Mohammed bin Salman told Bloomberg last month that 1,500 Saudi citizens were arrested over the last 3 years because he, the Crown Prince, was trying to, quote, get rid of extremism and terrorism without a civil war, a lot of people, especially in the West, will hear that and say, he's got a fair point. They've seen hate preachers, extremist clerics coming out of Saudi Arabia for years, and they think, fair enough if the prince wants to lock some of these people up to try and shut down extremism. What's your response to people who say
well,
that?
actually, it's not accurate. He is curtailing, he is attacking the very moderate voices that actually spearheaded the campaign against terrorism for the past 2 decades. My father, for example, was the one who called a spade. He pinpointed terrorism, and he called it, and he demanded justice against all terrorists in Saudi Arabia. He was actually spearheading the campaign, really, along with the state at that time. At that time, the state benefited from all his campaign and his efforts.
Your father has spoken out against terrorism, as you say, including against the 9/11 attacks, against Osama bin Laden himself. But the fact is that he was once a hero of bin Laden's. The late al-Qaeda leader even cited your father, Salman al-Auda, as his ideal personality. He praised your father for enlightening Muslim youth. You accept, surely at the very minimum, that whatever he says now, he was once a quote-unquote extremist.
Well, you know what? In the 80s, bin Laden liked so much the royal family, and he was very close to them. Those who actually gave all the platform, those who pushed the jihadi agenda at that time, those who ran the show at that time, those who should be responsible. My father was a popular cleric. Yeah. He was admired by everybody. The royal at that time, he was respected by the royal family, by the people, by different factions.
Timeline-wise, just to be fair and get our facts right, when bin Laden had turned against the Saudi government, when he'd already carried out the World Trade Center attacks, and he published his famous fatwa against Americans and foreign invaders, etc., in the mid-90s, he was still praising your dad.
No, he is not. He's actually just using my father's popularity to get into his audience.
And your father was never a fan of bin Laden's?
No, he was never a fan of bin Laden. He did not even consider bin Laden a scholar or a sheikh.
But he clearly, Salman al-Auda, has evolved in his views over the years, I think it's fair to say.
Of course, but he was never violent.
Fine. So he was never violent, but he's evolved in his views, let's say, and this is very crude words, from a more conservative position to a more liberal position, I think Westerners would put it as.
Especially socially.
So socially, so on democracy, on non-Muslims, on sectarianism, on his attitudes towards gay people. Is it fair to say that if your father was left undisturbed by the government and able to preach and able to talk to his 14 million followers and tell them about his changing views, he could actually have a more reformist impact on the Saudi population than Mohammed bin Salman?
Yes, very true. And that's why Mohammed bin Salman attacked him, because he could pull the rug under the quote-unquote reformist agenda. It could expose the reformist agenda that the state now is saying it's pushing for.
So on Mohammed bin Salman and on Jamal Khashoggi and his gruesome death at the hands of this team of Saudi assassins in Istanbul, do you believe MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, gave the order to kill Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, you know what? Who gave the Attorney General the order to seek death penalty against my father for similar views of that of Jamal Khashoggi's? Who actually, there are reports even of death under torture in Saudi prison while I'm speaking right now. Turki al-Jasser was reportedly dead under torture in Saudi Arabia. Sulaiman al-Dawish is also reportedly dead, but we're not sure about that.
So you believe the Crown Prince is responsible for these deaths and for Jamal Khashoggi's death?
Whoever ordered that, whoever oversaw that, will actually will be responsible for the death of Jamal Khashoggi.
Abdullah, when Jamal Khashoggi was on this show on UpFront back in March, he said he didn't, quote, want to be the next Salman al-Auda, referring to your father being in prison at the time. Tragically, he ended up meeting a fate worse than your father's. Dare I ask, do you now worry what will happen to you? How much of a threat do you think there is against you as a Saudi citizen now living in the US, criticizing MBS and the Saudi authorities?
Well, at some point I thought it's very difficult for the state to use the long arm to reach dissidents abroad, and those even who did not present themselves as dissidents, like Jamal Khashoggi and me. But now, after what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, I think everyone is, the message actually the state sent is that everyone is threatened. Everyone, we can reach everyone everywhere. So it's very, very dangerous. And we have seen a pattern.
Have you had threats against you?
Yeah, I got threats like every hour, not every day. On Twitter, I get threats from different parties. Yeah.
And I believe you have more than a dozen members of your family in Saudi Arabia who've been banned from traveling. Is that correct?
True.
So they can't come and see you and you can't go and see them?
Yes, true.
One last question, Abdullah. You've been here in the US since the summer of 2017, before your father's arrest back home in Saudi Arabia. Do you have any message for Donald Trump, for Jared Kushner, for John Bolton, for these hardcore supporters of MBS and the Saudi government here in Washington, D.C.?
Well, if we want to perpetuate a good relationship that lasts longer, and for the best interest of both parties, we should do that with the Saudi people, with the Saudi institutions. If one individual was impulsive, was really dangerous, there are many alternatives. We have seen that even within the royal family, there are so many royals who could understand the reformist agenda. The real reformist agenda could allow for a margin of freedom for the people, could protect the basic rights of the Saudi people. So what the MBS agenda and his team is producing is actually the environment that establishes, that could establish an environment for terrorists to flourish and to live.
Abdullah Al-Auda will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.